Welcome to the Establish the Edge podcast. I'm your host, Mike Leone, here with Adam Rauch once again for GPP Game Scores podcast, week 11. As always, before we dive into week 11, Adam, let's recap week 10 a little bit. For those watching on the Establish the Edge YouTube channel, have the game stack plot up from last week. And we see that the real winner last week was the Cincinnati Houston game in terms of like an overall game stack really getting there. We saw, especially late, Cincinnati, really the Joe Burrow triple stack, which popped in the Sims and small field stuff, kind of ran fortunate, but it did get there late with Chase and Irwin being like plus values, but not amazing. And then Tyler Boyd being really good value, Burrow getting there. On the bring back side of things, Tank Dell was okay, but Noah Brown and Devin Singletary went nuts. They were awesome. And yeah, you could have had 4 or 5 plays from that game and really hit. You and I, Adam, though, we opted for some DAX stacks, which came in at really low ownership. You can see on this graph, like only 6% ownership in that game. Of course, didn't force the run back, though, with how well Dallas projected and how many points they projected to score. Kind of got the nut outcome for what we were hoping for, which is Dallas scores a ton of points, gets there in 3 quarters. I had Dax, CD, Ferguson on my Thunderdome team that came in second. I know you played some Dax stuff as well.
Yeah, I actually was fortunate enough to fall into the Dax CD Cook stack.
Baby.
Yes, the problem was I just didn't land on the right running backs. Played into James Conner, who didn't play well, and I played into Mix and Chalk, which I'm deeply regretting. But yeah, it was kind of an interesting week on the total because looking at the stack plot, you already kind of mentioned Bengals, Texans, but that Chargers Lions game sticks out because it scored on average so much higher than the other 2 games we just mentioned. However, if you looked at the leaderboards on at least in large field tournaments, I know you kind of talked about your small field team and you kind of specialize in more small field stuff, but in large field, you weren't seeing any Herbert stacks or Burrow or Stroud stacks at the top of leaderboards. It was pretty much exclusively all Dax stacks. And I think primary reason why is, we talked a little bit about this last week. I think we're going to talk about it again heading into this slate, but affordability of your stack can play such a big role in how your team ends up inevitably doing in terms of how high you can get on top of these large field leaderboards. That Herbert, Amon-Ra, Keenan Allen stack scored really well. It didn't score quite as well as the Dak, CD, Cook stack, which seemed to be kind of the most popular stack that I saw on leaderboards. But if you played the Dak stack over the Herbert stack, you're saving over around $5,500 in salary, which allowed you to kind of fall into those other spiked plays. I know Noah Brown was popular amongst winning lineups as well, but if you played that Dak stack, you actually probably had the flexibility to play Keenan Allen or play Amon-Ra on a solo, play them solo instead of stacking them. So the plot doesn't tell the whole story. The scatter plot doesn't tell the whole story. You kind of have to dive into the numbers and see, well, how did the salary kind of play into it? But overall, it was a fun week, I think, in terms of being able to kind of build those flexible stacks that were maybe a little bit less owned than we thought.
Yeah, it was definitely a fun week. I was surprised the ownership on Detroit Chargers got steamed a little bit. It did come off Seattle, Washington. And I think the Geno stuff ended up simming well in post-lock because it wasn't owned a ton. To your point about, the DAX stack being a little bit more affordable than LAC Detroit, it also just cleared up roster spots because you didn't feel the need to do a bring back. So to your point, I had a spot. I ended up playing Eckler as a one-off in that game. But yeah, you very easily, because you had spots to play kind of I played the cheap values from Cincinnati, Houston, the expensive guy from Detroit Chargers. So sometimes that's fun and interesting to do based on how the values of the slate spit out. Other slates, I kind of want that real mega correlation, and I just want to get one thing right, like Cincinnati, Houston. So it's kind of just depends on how the slate shakes out and the individual values. But we'll take a look here at the game scores plot for week 11. As always, a little bit work in progress. We're doing ownership a little bit later in the week now. We run our default algorithm in the beginning, but I've just found it easier to really tidy it up Friday evenings into Saturday mornings. So just keep that in mind. But we had the Chicago at Detroit game spitting out as the top game score game. I'm worried that there's going to be some more ownership on this game, with Fields coming back. Projections might be lagging there a little bit around the industry, but this game is tied for the highest total on the slate with Arizona at Houston. Fields, his individual ceilings huge, but we also get like decent values on DJ Moore, Cole Kmet with the team total on Chicago coming up from where it's been at. And then Detroit has one of the highest team totals on the slate. And, there's another team, San Francisco. Like these two teams at this point, their individual players all have like really good ceiling projections, the way they've been performing and the way our model captures them. So it can be tough to pin down the right guy in each of these scenarios, but yeah, pretty strong ceiling projections on like Gibbs, Amon-Ra, and Laporta at their respective positions.
Yeah, and I think the Detroit side's going to get maybe a little bit. I don't know if it's going to get steamed up as much, maybe as much as it to get chalky, but I think it will probably be a little bit more popular than we have it projected now. This is the second straight week that Detroit's facing a pretty poor defense. And this time they'll actually, or no, sorry, I don't think they're at. Is this in Detroit? Yeah, this is in Detroit. So
yeah, they're home. So we get the dome.
Right,
we get the dome game. We get the dome bump.
Love a dome bump. Yeah, and Fields coming back, I don't think is going to fool anyone. I mean, you talked about his ceiling projection right now. I think he'll probably be a little bit more owned than 4%, which is where we have him on DraftKings. But his ceiling is always so strong. DJ Moore has consistently produced better with Justin Fields on the field as opposed to when special agent, secret agent Tyson Bagent has been on the field. So, yeah, I think this is a good game to target. I like it from an affordability standpoint. You can mix in a Moore, you can mix in a Kmet to kind of free up some salary. You've got running back options from Detroit as well. I think Gibbs and Montgomery are still viable in stack builds. They both have such good carved out roles right now. Gibbs is, I think, is going to be the obvious popular play there. And then, similar to last week where you could run into a spot where the tight end just blows up. I mean, last week we saw TJ Hawkinson blow up at kind of a more expensive tight end price tag, and Sam Laporta kind of profiles similarly where he's around that same price. He's 5,800 on DraftKings. He's not projecting for that much ownership at all. And he doesn't really have any of like the injury concerns that we had with Hawkinson last week. So that could be a fun way to build. Goff is going to be less owned than Fields, of course. They're pretty close in salary, and Goff has no rushing upside. So there's good ways to kind of build different stacks and mix it in with some low ownership plays. So I like it.
Yeah, the next game's Tampa Bay at San Francisco. San Francisco, like Detroit, another one of those teams where the ceiling projection on these guys is really good. Obviously, you have CMC at wide receiver. You've got both Debo and Ayuk. You've got Kittle at tight end. The values can be a little bit difficult to pick from when all four of these guys are healthy and playing at the same time, which can be the challenge. It is a low total game at 41.5. The one thing that's nice about this setup for San Francisco is Tampa Bay has a much better run defense than pass defense, which, hopefully will encourage San Francisco to throw a bit more. And it makes Purdy a pretty strong value on both sides. And you can stack them with any of the four guys. San Francisco's an interesting name too. It's like you can double stack. You can do the alpha skinnies. It can be tough to pin down exactly what to play. On the Tampa Bay side, Adam, I know last week I had sort of hit on a few times how San Francisco's defense in DVOA wasn't that strong, and then they went out and dominated Jacksonville, and lo and behold, they're up to 7th in FTN's pass rate DVOA already. But Tampa Bay is going to have to throw the ball a ton, and I think that's like baked into our projections. Part of what's going into the game scores, we're expecting a really high pass rate on Tampa Bay, and that gives you Mike Evans, which, speaking of ceiling, he's week in and week out one of the guys with the bigger discrepancies between base projection and ceiling projection.
Yeah, sorry I lost you there for a second, Mike. But yeah, this game it kind of stands out because the game score is pretty high. At least when we're recording here on Friday morning. But the total is considerably lower than some of the other games we're going to talk about. And I think you kind of hit on that. Like, San Francisco is always going to project well from a ceiling standpoint. And yeah, we kind of have to hope that Tampa can push San Francisco's defense. The problem is, like, from a value standpoint on Tampa's side, like, it's just tough. In this spot, I would probably want to play Mike Evans, but it's just like not a great price on DraftKings to try to fit in with like full stack builds. I think he probably fits better on like skinny stack builds. But yeah, I think you want to get, Purdy's a great value, and this sets up well for them against a kind of a pass funnel defense. We've seen pretty consistently be a pass funnel defense this year. No one's going to want to play Chris Godwin on the other side. Bringing him back with Tampa, I think he probably fits full game stack builds better. Or if you want to kind of get kind of gross at tight end, you could kind of maybe run with a Cade Otton play if you didn't want to spend up on George Kittle. So yeah, lots of different ways to play it. Ownership's not going to be too big of a concern here, even if McCaffrey gets close to 20%. So yeah, I like the flexibility. I like the ownership. But thankfully we've got flexible QB salaries to kind of help us out here.
Yeah, the Tampa Bay defensive pass rate over expectations plus 4%, one of the highest in the league. To your point about them being a pass funnel, and we'll just know. I think like Rachaad White could be somewhat interesting, where people don't want to play him into this negative script. He's been somewhat chalky the past few weeks. He's a little bit pricier now in a worse matchup, but he's been catching so many dump offs and the clear workhorse goal line back that I think he's on DraftKings viable. FanDuel, the wide receivers start to look a little bit better than they do on DraftKings, despite the scoring discrepancies there. The next game we have is Seattle at the Rams. That makes one of Pat Thorman's pace up games. The next one that also makes it is Arizona at Houston, and then Chargers at Green Bay. So really our middle three, next three games here are all on Thorman's pace up, though I think he kind of admitted he had to stretch a little bit this week to find the pace up spots outside of Arizona at Houston. But yeah, have interested in Seattle and LA. I think on the LA side, there could be a little bit of lag on the ownership just because they performed poorly. We had Stafford out, prior, and with him back, Puka and Kupp have seen their salaries come down to like much more affordable and manageable places, which makes a Stafford stack there interesting. It's always tough with Stafford where like we get a really big discrepancy between him and his wide receivers, where his wide receivers rate as strong values and then he doesn't. And it doesn't seem to make sense, but part of that's because the catch volume for Puka and Kupp is so concentrated and so strong, and Stafford provides absolutely nothing on the ground that, it becomes an odd situation though, Adam, in terms of trying to stack Stafford with these two when he's a bad value. So I almost prefer, if you're going to stack it, to go with the Seattle side and a cheaper Geno, and then just bring it back with one of those expensive Rams receivers.
Yeah, I was even thinking like maybe this game is more kind of an appropriate mini correlation game, maybe as opposed to even going like full game stack. But I do agree with you. I think if you're going to build the full stack, it's probably better off building around Geno, who showed some ceiling potential last week. One thing to keep an eye on will be Tyler Lockett's health status. Right, as of yesterday, I think he was listed as questionable. I don't know, if that's on the trending towards the outside of questionable or the limited side of questionable. We'll see his practice report today. So I think, but if you want to try to build the Rams stack, if you want to kind of fall into that lesser value for Stafford, I think that will probably allow you to kind of not allow you. I think it'll encourage you to play JSN on the other side, even though he's also not a great value. But his ownership is still pretty low right now. But I think in a stack build, he fits pretty well with Cup and Puka, even though their respective salaries could be at their lowest point. This is, from a football standpoint, this is kind of like a make it or break it game for the Rams. This may be the last really good spot where they have a beatable defense and the team is motivated. So I'm hoping they come out in full force. But yeah, I'm probably more interested in playing mini correlations as opposed to stacks in this game. But I would not scoff at Geno Stacks because, again, he just kind of frees up space as far as salary is concerned. So yeah, I'm kind of mid on it right now, but I could see it. I could see it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough week. I'm kind of like mid on a lot of games. We do get Arizona at Houston, tied with Chicago at Detroit for highest total dome game. This is one of the Thorman's pace up games that he's most confident in. And you can see why with, the way Houston pushes the ball down the field and how awesome CJ Stroud has been and their pass rate being a little bit higher with Damian Pierce out. And then the Arizona side of things, their neutral pass rate looks a little bit better with Kyler, obviously not running quite as fast as they did when Kyler played under Cliff. But yeah, and you get, somewhat concentrated offense on the Arizona side. Trey McBride's been dominating. I think the big game for Marquise Brown is going to come with better QB play, but even Kyler missed him wide open for a touchdown. But there's a lot of different routes you can go. And this is one of the cheaper games too. Arizona, we've got green values on Rondale, McBride, Marquise, Kyler. So there's a double or triple in there somewhere. We've got Stroud as an okay value, but strong ceiling play with Devin Singletary as a good value. The wide receiver stuff gets shaky on Houston this week, though, with it looking like Nico Collins is back. I know Noah Brown popped up on the injury report. We have him projected in right now. But if he is in, you've got Brown, Woods, Nico, and Dell, and kind of trying to figure those guys out, obviously alongside Dalton Schultz at tight end, all while their salaries are increasing is probably, the most challenging aspect of this. And then Singletary goes from no one wants to play him last week because he fouled his chalk. Then he goes off. Now everyone wants to play him this week and he's going to be really chalky.
Right. But yeah, and the fortunate thing I think for Houston is even if Noah Brown is out, I think their passing game will still be high functioning and will still be productive. And I still think the spot is good enough to where even though Brown is out, they're not going to necessarily miss him. And, we could kind of pivot maybe from the Devin Singletary narrative where, okay, now he's, had a bounce back game last week. Maybe people are going to be on him more than the passing game, or maybe they're going to be more on Dalton Schultz where, if we get Nico Collins back at full health, he looks like a really appealing play as part of the stack. I think he's going to be more owned than how we have him right now. Once we get a promising practice report, but I think he's probably set up the best out of any of the receivers as far as being able to have a ceiling game and not being as highly owned as what I think Tank Dell is going to be owned at. We have Dell right around 17%. I don't think Nico's going to come anywhere close to that. And Nico's not a great value. I understand why the projection is where it is, but again, the nice thing about this game is it's so affordable. It's one of the more affordable games that projects well. So you're just going to be able to create different ways, different builds to kind of attack this game. The Arizona ownership stuff is a little tricky. You've got also two wide receivers around the 3K range that are going to project pretty chalky as well. You don't want to get burned by anyone as far as ownership is concerned. And we're kind of setting ourselves up here where someone's going to have to fail on Arizona, even if the game hits. So that would be my only concern is like if you're going to build heavy on Arizona, yeah, just don't pick the wrong guy because you could get pretty easily burned.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough game where the Arizona side has a lot of ownership and then the Houston side has a lot of rising prices or chalky Singletary. So I have to think through this one a little bit more. I could see it getting steamed up too, and it might end up being a fade, not because I don't like the potential, but just because I think the ownership could be really concentrated. The last game that has a positive value on DraftKings is Chargers at Green Bay. Last game that has a positive value on FanDuel is Vegas at Miami. Let's talk about Chargers Green Bay a little bit. And then Miami, we kind of have like a second section that's like basically teams that could go off that you don't have to do the bring back on. But Chargers Green Bay, as I noted, another one of those games where Thorman kind of dreamed about, had him in his pace up article. And yeah, I mean, on the surface, I don't love this game with how bad Green Bay's been and with how expensive kind of the key pieces on the Chargers are. But it does look like Keenan and Eckler are probably going to be lowish owned. And then on the Green Bay side, if you want to take a leap of faith, I do still think Watson and Aaron Jones have pretty good ceilings. But this is, for me personally, Adam, like a clear mini correlation spot. I don't like the quarterback values here.
Oh man, I know Jordan Love breakout game. I
I,
I was
I
I was kind of thinking, I don't know, like I could be,
be a dirt plant candidate for
yeah, I
you.
mean,
I don't know.
could be. It could be. Hey, look, all I'm gonna say is Evan Silva likes this game, and when the big dog speaks, you listen. I mean, no, I don't. Yeah, I do share similar sentiments with you. The good thing, at least, about the Charger stack is like last week we just like could not build it. Like I just could not convince myself to go full Chargers because again, the Lions side was so expensive too. It just like wasn't viable from an affordability standpoint, and that kind of played out. And even though that game popped, like you could see it kind of play out in the leaderboard where those stacks didn't finish at the top. This week, though, we get a little bit of a reprieve because Green Bay is pretty affordable. So while their ceiling isn't, I mean, obviously the ceiling is going to be way lower, but yeah, as far as like a full stack, I don't know if I'm going to do it, but I don't think I would. Again, I just like Rams Seattle stacks. Like I wouldn't scoff at people for trying to build a stack around it because not often are you going to be able to play Herbert and Allen and Eckler and be able to bring it back with one or two guys on the other side. So this is probably one of the spots to do it. It is going to be tough. I think there's even though like this isn't necessarily data driven. I think playing in Green Bay as opposed to playing in LA will certainly have an effect on the Chargers offense to a certain degree. So I think that's why the total's a little bit lower than these other games. But yeah, it's an interesting game. I kind of joked about Jordan Love, but I don't know if I'm really going to play Jordan Love.
Yeah, I do like the minis just because I mean, hoping against hope with Christian Watson, but even him, Aaron Jones, with one of the expensive Chargers, makes some sense to me. But I think there's a few games too where you could just stack the offense on one side. I've done that 3 weeks in a row. Normally, I like the tighter correlations and only having to get one thing right. But if you have an offense that looks undervalued and has a high ceiling, you don't have to force to bring back. So we get Miami this week, and that one's most interesting for a bring back over on FanDuel, just because I think Davante Adams is in a pretty good spot where he's going to get peppered with targets. They're going to have to throw a lot more than they did the previous 2 weeks, but you can play multiple Miami teammates too without the quarterbacks at all or without a bring back, just because the efficiency and the scoring upside for them is so huge. But Washington and Howell stuff with their password over expectations, another one where I could see playing the Washington stacks without a bring back on the Giants side of things. And then, the Dallas stuff, it's kind of crazy. It just keeps getting under owned week in and week out. But 3 straight weeks, they've had their best 3 password over expectation games since the start of 2022, the last 3 weeks. So a clear shift in philosophy for them. And CD is absolute, again, it's another week where like on FanDuel, we've got chalk Tony Pollard yet again. And we've got, single digit owned CeeDee Lamb and Dak. I'm sure we'll manually bump Dak and CD on final ownership given recent performances, but people seem to be like each week the price raises just enough to keep people away when these spreads in these games are big for Dallas.
Yeah, I didn't think this week was going to set up as well for like a team stack with no bring back compared to last week. I think last week after kind of talking through it on the pod, like I was, and that's kind of why like I kind of leaned into the Dak stacks last week, is because I just didn't think there was as strong of setups for like full game stacks. Whereas this week, I think we have at least a couple spots where like the full game stacks may project out better, and we may want that additional correlation. Out of those 3 games you talked about, if I'm leaning into a team stack, I'm probably just going straight back to the Miami off a bye week at home against Vegas. I think that for me probably stands out the most, and I'll be willing to play into Tyreek chalk if I'm doing that. They're getting A-Chain back this week. Waddle, I could see Waddle eventually getting to a ceiling game, even though we really haven't had that this year. But if I'm leaning into a team stack, I'd probably lean Miami, but I wouldn't blame anyone for wanting to go back to the Dak stacks. It's pretty much the exact same setup, except they're on the road this week.
All right, Adam, it's time for Dirt Plants.
All right. Well, I just said I wasn't going to play Jordan Love, but I think my Dirt Plant, I'm going to go with Christian Watson. I don't know when else you're going to be able to play this guy. His salary just keeps decreasing. His ownership just keeps decreasing. He has no chemistry with Jordan Love whatsoever, but they're playing the Chargers at home. If you can get Green Bay and pass happy game script, I think this is going to be the week. It's crazy to look at the salaries and Watson now being significantly less expensive than Romeo Doubs. I mean, that's just kind of how the year's gone for him. But hey, these plays got to be gross. I think this is a Watson week, so I'll go with him.
Okay, I like it. I will go with Rachaad White. I think he's the guy, at least on DraftKings. I think on both FanDuel and DraftKings, but FanDuel, you can make a better case for the Tampa Bay receivers. But he's the guy that sort of on DK can make this game stack work. And I don't think he's going to be owned at all this week. And he fits what we want in a dirt plant, which is like inefficient back that no one wants to play. Give it to me. Those are my guys.
Yes.
So
yes,
Rachaad White to make the Tampa Bay San Francisco stack work. Get a bunch of checkdowns in this game. Get a goal line touchdown to keep the game just close enough to push San Francisco, and we're all happy.
I'd be happy with that. I want to play that stack, so I'm hoping for it.
All right, Adam, thanks for joining me each week doing the GPP game scores. Adam will have his article up on site later today, and we'll have a little bit of a fresher run of ownership for that. Thanks for tuning in, everybody, and best of luck this week.